Hi, I want to talk to you today about the implications of role ethics for the employer-employee relationship. Let's start with Confucius. At the very beginning of the Analects, Confucius says, "Isn't it wonderful to learn and apply what you've learned? Isn't it delightful to have friends coming from far away? And isn't he a person of complete virtue who doesn't get upset that others don't appreciate him?" In that simple verse are three basic levels of human relationships. The relationship I have to myself. Where do I learn, practice what I've learned? Inside myself. But then the question of, well, friends coming from far away. There are those who are close to me, my friends, my family. And then there are other people, others who may or may not appreciate me. This is something that I think runs all the way through the Analects and through Confucian ethics in general. The obligations I have to other people and the obligations they have to me depend on our relationships. Some rules govern everyone in their relation to everyone else. Those apply even at that level of mere acquaintances or even strangers, that outer level. And in Confucius, there's only one of those, a rule of reciprocity. What you don't want done to you, don't do to others. But within the family, within friendships, there are different kinds of obligations, and the same thing is true of myself. There are different kinds of additional obligations that apply to me. And so when we think about the nature of human relationships from that point of view, we can think there are four basic kinds of relationships. There's the relationship I have to myself, or we might say, generalizing, that I have to people very, very close to me, to my husband or wife, for example. That I have, maybe within a business context, to partners in a business enterprise. If it's a small enterprise especially, the partners may be sort of all in it together, all for one, one for all. And that kind of relationship is a very special kind of relationship. Then, within the realm of family and friends, I have peer relationships, horizontal relationships between siblings, for example, or friends, or let's say cousins, people at the same level of the family. And I also have vertical relationships between parent and child, between parent and grandparent. Relationships that assume something specific, some degree of closeness, but there is, in one case, kind of a hierarchy, and in another case, something of an equality. And then there is the relationship I have in general with other people. Well, those four kinds of relationships are taken as basic in something known as role regulation theory or relationship regulation theory. The idea behind this is that all human relationships are really combinations of those four basic relationship types. Those four types, on this view, are basic units of analysis in the human mind. They're basic structures of the human mind. They're how every culture and every human being within every culture thinks about social relationships. I am either together with myself or somebody extremely close to me. I am together with peers. I am in a hierarchy, in a position above some people, let's say, below other people. Or I've got someone who is a stranger or a mere acquaintance, someone who I don't have any very specific relationship with at all. Well, each of those relationship models, each of those relationship types, carries with it certain responsibilities, certain roles. Alan Page Fisk has said that people in all cultures use four basic models to understand human relationships. And those models are ones of, first of all, communal sharing. The kind of relationship I have to myself, to my spouse, to other people perhaps who are extremely, extremely close to me, with whom I am in a full partnership. And then there are relationships that are, well, horizontal relationships, you might say. Equality matching relationships, he calls them, that are peer-to-peer, like sibling to sibling, cousin to cousin, coworker to coworker. There are relationships that are authority ranking relationships, where we've got a rank in a kind of hierarchy. And there our obligations are going to vary depending upon our position in the hierarchy. And finally, there are those skew relationships, the relationships that he refers to as market pricing relationships, where there is nothing specific, it's merely an acquaintance, maybe even a stranger. And there is nothing specific beyond just human-to-human interaction that governs our roles, our rights, our responsibilities. Well, I want to think about what this means for the employee-employer relationship. And it suggests that there are, first of all, four possible models we could use in thinking about that relationship. Now, one of them is really salient, the authority-ranking relationship. It looks like the boss has authority over the employees, over the people working for the boss. And so there is a very direct authority-ranking relationship there, or in really almost any organization. Now, sometimes it is just a set of partners, and nobody really has any authority over anyone else. It's all done in a kind of cooperative fashion, and that kind of co-op can exist. But ordinarily, organizations have a kind of hierarchy, and the larger the organization, the more explicit, the more direct that hierarchy is. So we could start with the authority ranking model, and we could think that's the fundamental model that governs employment. The employer is the ultimate authority. The employees have varying degrees of authority in the hierarchy, but are basically subordinate in that kind of position within the hierarchy. So what then are the obligations of employers, of managers, middle managers, of then people at the bottom of the scale who don't have anybody in turns reporting to them? Well, what are the obligations? What are the obligations that a child has toward the parent, for example? Obedience, respect. Well, that's like the obligation of an employee to the person they work for. They should obey the rules. They should treat that person with respect. If the parent asks the child to do something, the child should do it. So in general, to follow directions, to do what the employer asks them to do, those are things that appear to be obligations on the part of the subordinate in these kinds of relationships. The person who's in a higher position is generally recognized as having not only greater responsibilities, but also greater freedom to make choices, gets to make choices on behalf of the underlings in various ways, but also has responsibilities. The parent has a responsibility to take care of the child, to nurture them, to educate them, to train them. And similarly, the employer has an obligation to take care of the employees, to nurture them, to train them, to educate them, to help them improve. So this is something that goes in both directions. Middle management can be hard because that person has obligations in both directions, to nurture and take care of the people working for them, but also to be obedient to the people up above. And sometimes those are in tension, and it's very difficult to do that. So there are lots and lots of real-world business ethics problems that come out of that middle management position, where you have obligations that are downward pointing in the hierarchy, obligations that are upward pointing, and they don't always turn out to be compatible. A second model is a familial model. It's based on the idea of equality. So think in terms of cousins, of siblings, of friends, peer-to-peer relationships. The idea here is we're all part of the same family. What gives me obligations to my brother, let's say, or to a cousin, or to a friend? It is partly what we agree to, but it is largely driven by things that are not directly any agreement or promise or anything like that. It's that we are part of the same enterprise. So we owe each other equal treatment. We owe each other respect and mutual support. And that's the kind of thing that in a familial model of employment is what employers and employees owe each other, as well as what various employees owe one another. And so the employer here is viewed as really a peer, as somebody who is there as part of the joint enterprise, is coordinating perhaps, is working together, sort of like the older sibling, if you want to think of it that way. There's got to be some authority element to that maybe. But the basic thought here is not a question of giving command and then people following commands, of one person having the responsibility to nurture the others. Rather, it's a cooperative enterprise where everybody is helping and nurturing and trying to foster the same goal as everyone else. And so, from this point of view, this whole relationship, the entire organization, is based more or less on the model of the family, on that kind of horizontal, equality matching sort of relationship. So what rights do people have here? They have much more extensive rights to input, to having their own views and thoughts considered than they might be thought to have on an authority-ranking relationship. They also have the responsibility to treat everyone else as an equal, but they have a right to equal treatment as well. So they have a right to be respected, to be valued as a peer now, not just as a subordinate. A third model is based on the communal sharing model, that very intimate model that one spouse, let's say, might have to another, or that partners in a small startup might have. There, it's a communal model, one for all for one. We're all in this together. Often here there isn't much division of responsibility. There is a lot of sharing and a sense of being willing to support the common enterprise, as in the familial model, but here it's even more intense. We often don't have very clear divisions among who is exactly doing what. We all pitch in to help out. We not only support one another, but nobody's very concerned about exactly who gets what benefit. We're all in this together, and we're worried primarily about the health of the organization. So our responsibility is to promote the health of the organization and to support the other people with whom we have this intimate relationship. We're all in. We are willing to commit ourselves completely to the enterprise. Conversely, we do have a right to full consideration, to being treated the same way by the other people in the enterprise. But in this communal sharing model, it seems odd to think about the rights. Really, we start talking language of rights only when things go wrong. We're thinking about really us all having the responsibility toward one another and all being willing to share fully in every aspect of the enterprise. Well, a final model is based on the market pricing idea, that basically in employment, we're like strangers hiring one another to do a job. I might hire somebody I've never met before to do something for me, or my publisher might send my book off to Singapore to be typeset, and they may not have ever met the person in Singapore before. They are doing this simply as a market pricing relationship. It's based on a contract. And so similarly, we might think, look, what are the obligations of employers and employees inside of an employment relationship? They're basically determined by the terms of the contract. What have you agreed to do? And what consideration is owed you as a result of doing it? That's all that's at stake. In addition, of course, to the kinds of moral rules that apply to everyone everywhere. And so there's some presumably absolutely universal moral rules that apply all the way across all of the various relationship types. And so they're going to apply here, but otherwise it's simply the terms of the market transaction. If I buy something from someone, let's say they're at a farmer's market selling a basket of tomatoes and I agree to give them $5 for the basket of tomatoes, then it's very simple. That's the terms. I owe them $5. They owe me the basket of tomatoes. There's not a lot of additional complication. Now, of course, general considerations apply. I may not gratuitously harm them and so on, but nevertheless, basically, it's spelled out by the terms of the contract. Otherwise, it's just the universal human background. Same thing here. Of course, don't treat people immorally in some general way. Oh, you owe them what you'd owe any other human being, business relationship or not. But in addition to that, what do you owe? Well, it's spelled out in the employment contract. It might be a highly detailed contract that is quite complicated. It might be very simple. My own, well, the basic contracts that's unique to me is one page. But on the other hand, it refers to the Handbook of Operating Procedures that is the size of a telephone book. And so there's a lot of stuff that's implicitly involved in that employment contract that spells out very detailed rights and responsibilities for both parties. There is no simple answer then to the question of what the employer rights and responsibilities are, what employee rights and responsibilities are. It really depends on how we classify that employment relationship. Is it an authority ranking relationship? Is it a horizontal equality matching relationship? Is it a sort of skew market pricing relationship? Is it one of those very intimate communal sharing relationships? It may be different in different kinds of organizations. And so one thing to think about if you're in the position of selecting employees or employers is to think, what kind of model do I really feel comfortable with? What do I like? What do I want? At this stage, at any rate, of my career, or if I'm the employer, what do I want this relationship to be? A serious set of problems can emerge if people have different conceptions. The employee thinks this is all one big family. The employer thinks it's a very strict authority ranking relationship. That's a recipe for unhappiness. But conversely, the employee is expecting to be told what to do in an authority ranking relationship, and instead this is a communal sharing relationship, all for one, one for all, where my responsibilities are kind of vague and I just have to figure out what's best for supporting the organization at this time. A lot of employees might feel utterly lost in that situation. So we can't really spell out responsibilities and rights without having a model like that in mind, at least from the point of view of relationship regulation theory. First decide what kind of organization we are, and then we can get a guideline as to what employer rights and responsibilities are.